Ready to start?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. With the discussion 2 days ago on Southern California sparked the bigger question of where and how to analyze these kinds of questions. How is San Diego different? Why? And how can we then connect this to the broader context, like China, different neighborhoods in Chinese cities, and maybe in between France as an example, and then going down to neighborhoods. We heard the discussion of Orange County with the differences by location. These are illustrative, valuable examples. That is, and start with something like, why is my high school different? I'll remind you the anecdote if you weren't here, didn't see that, it's in the video. I asked this question a couple of years ago about the South, and I said, who's from the South can give us an anecdote that's different? And one young woman in the class said, my mother received a phone call from the teacher who said, your daughter is a problem. Oh, really? She doesn't use sir and ma'am. If she wants to be in this class, she needs to use sir and ma'am. Okay. What does that say, and how does that connect with all these other things? It's the meaning of sir and ma'am in a broader context, and let's connect that with front page news. Israel and the Gaza battles, the broader issue within the U.S. Congress versus the Senate over whether to target together Ukraine and Israel funding or not. This is division of the whole, center of major funding for these potentially two major wars. And what's the key issue in both the Ukraine and in Israel in many respects is egalitarianism versus hierarchy. And that we talked about explicitly in the new political culture in which we had here. And surveys that were done, these are from the 6 West European publics from 1970 to 1988. That is, there were changes in the kinds of the percentages based on the questions which Ronald Engelhardt really developed in his, he developed a world values survey. This is the most valuable specific set of questions which have been used to capture sort of hierarchy versus and tradition versus egalitarianism and new cultural orientations. He was a student here. He worked at NORC, then was at Michigan, and then continued internationally. But what if we close the window by about half, but leave it maybe 1/3 open? So that's good. What this shows is from people who were born. That is, it's not just these are the dates of birth of the different respondents from 1970 over here, from 1970 to 1988, and these go back. That is, but what this shows clearly and simply is that more European citizens articulate a different set of values and priorities over time. Through the 20th century, This holds across all of the European publics, and you can, so similar things here. Yeah, here we go. Across the U.S. and to some degree, in that the country that is most surveyed on linked with this was Japan. Same sort of patterns that have emerged in all of these. Engelhardt and their group of the World Values Survey have published a couple dozens of books analyzing these kinds of data and these kinds of items. They didn't have at the beginning that much of a coherent framework for interpreting these results. They had a couple of items, and the core proposition of Engelhardt was, if you were an adolescent in your early 20s, roughly your folks' age right now, people are forming and crystallizing their cultural and political orientations. And the strong version in some is that they don't change fundamentally for most people for the rest of their lives. Now, the question is, how fundamental is fundamentally, and that's what's tricky. But and it's not 100%, but is it 51% or 80%? It depends on the item, depends on the context. But basically, you're at a critical age. Look at the conversations you're having with your dormitory, the people you eat with, etc. And then this has the this is too small. Turn it this way. Okay. Older French mayors, read the box on the left. Older French mayors are fiscally liberal, are also socially liberal, but not the younger French mayors. And so look at the dramatic differences by, let me get it up just a little higher. Older French mayors, over 60, down to those under 35. And the U.S. mayors of every age show virtually no relationship between fiscal and social liberalism. That is, these are two key dimensions of the new political culture. That is, if you're a traditional right, you're conservative on fiscal and social issues. If you're you should all know this one. Okay, so I'm simply showing you evidence, dramatic evidence, but then the question is, why do these mayors change, and what's related to these kinds of factors? This is where we get to the such things as, these are now U.S. mayors and council members in 1976 showed ideological clusterings similar to the French mayors in 1983. That is, traditional ideology is measured by a high correlation between social and fiscal liberalism. So Republicans' second term on the far left. In the middle, these are Democrats, and then far first-term Democrats, and the left and the right is those who are more responsive to citizens. So a question, how, not only left and right, but also an item, how important, we had a couple of items this is to a couple of thousands of U.S. mayors. How often do you vote against the majority of your citizens' preferences? How often do you vote against them? And a lot, to my surprise, how many people said, I often vote against my citizens' views. And that was more true in the past. That has gotten, and in international comparisons, the mayors in the world that were the least often to say this were in which country? Israel. The Israeli mayors seldom ever said they voted against the majority of their citizens. So this is not only interesting, but for a country, but where and why do these things come from? So Israel is a critical not just because of the newspaper, but for global understanding. So factors driving the new political culture. You've seen this before. I'm gonna pick up on some of these pieces today, and one piece of this, and that is, you've seen these before, but we're trying to make sense of where we can apply them and extend them and revise them to answer the questions I asked this. If we're going to ask, if we in the next days at some point, we will have a presentation on these issues within China with Professor Chen. I mean, she's made a presentation I've already seen. She's got a lot of very interesting data. The question is how to fit this within an analytical context that we can make these testable and analyzable. And here are the kinds of data which are available to make these sorts of analyses within China, which have generally not been pushed that far analytically, but they can. Okay, so the linkage here is this is the Tocqueville line. Tocqueville, Putnam, and I mentioned briefly Los Angeles on Monday. Los Angeles has the lowest trust of any major metro area in the U.S. Why and how is that linked with other things that we can make sense of? And the answer for the majority of the top consultants and the policies implemented in LA was Tocquevillian. That is, the problem is we have low trust. The cause of building trust from Tocqueville is civic participation in little groups, and therefore we need to have more little organizations within LA, and so they have about 80 of these were created. But then they found that some of them worked, quote, in a Tocquevillian way. That's line 1 up there at the top. More civic participation leads potentially, at least they're associated with more trust and legitimacy. Other things at the bottom, it could be negative. That is, the guy who wanted more patronage, he wanted the opposite. And so this could be undermining that these competing organizations could, or say that, or another example, Chicago. The classic term used in Chicago politics is the independents, the independent organizations meant, what did independent mean in Chicago? Yeah.
Opposed to the regular democratic organization or the machine.
Exactly. So the hierarchy is opposing egalitarianism and people who are independent of the organization. And so in that sense, the leader of that organization, and I'm quasi-quoting him. Let me quote Mayor Daley 1. Why the press said to Mayor Daley, "Why didn't you give those contracts to your son's insurance firm?" It's a father's duty to help his sons. Okay, that's the Trump-like familistic clientelism, which feeds into rewarding those in your family more than the ideal universalistic civil service exams promoting merit. Okay. So here, these things are being battled over. That is the biggest issue in the world today. Not just, don't look at international relations, look at domestic. And the key issue is corruption. China, massive. I mean, the Minister of Defense in China was fired last week. At least and so there are all kinds of investigational committees. And a group of them here came to Chicago because they wanted to study because Chicago has had a lot of corruption. And we've had a lot of efforts to constrain and contain, et cetera. Okay, so and one rationale for this Why is, we have enough, is this a separate factor or not? The rise of the arts. How does the rise of the arts of what I've just been saying? Anybody? How about Chicago? Why has the arts been, that is, the head of the National Endowment for the Arts said, Mayor Daley should be awarded a prize for the most important mayor in advancing the arts of any mayor in the United States. 10 years before, the lead novelist, Nobel Prize winner, wrote about Chicago. Without O'Hare, it's sheer despair. The opposite. Saul Bellow grew up in Chicago, and he saw this as dirty, messy, nasty, ethnic corruption, battles, etc. Is Daley seeing the same thing or the opposite thing, or how do they connect? Ethnic politics, as in today in the Ukraine and in Israel, is traditional ethnic nationalist politics. How can that be overcome, and how could the arts make a difference?
The arts make people more tolerant, I guess, and like exposed to different cultures and backgrounds.
Maybe, but why and how might this happen?
Like art tends to be more public oriented, and so if you're walking around the city and you're like exposed to different art styles, that might then have some it might be hard to like measure that or like, you know, quantify it, but like it might have some underlying impact in how you view social relationships or view people outside of your immediate ethnicity.
Okay, I mean you're struggling, and that's great. I mean that the idea is these are hard questions. There's not one simple right or wrong answer. But if we interview and talk with people in a couple of you have your hand up too?
Yeah, I was thinking also like the arts and culture is sort of the soft power aspect of like a country, you know, applies to a city, and it's a way for them to export their influence. And so, especially going back to Daily and the way he brought in art to Chicago, it's a way to make the city more attractive, and it's also through the endowment, through the patronage as well. I think there may be a link because of the number of authors that came to Chicago and the amount of authors that came down.
I was just going to make a similar point that we discussed with Chicago, was that it became a good job for artists from other areas, and that was also like the art scenes in Chicago were also like a job for tourism, and that like makes sense.
Wait, you're going a little too fast. The art scene became a what?
Like the arts in Chicago, like with places like the Art Institute and stuff, that's a draw for tourists. So that also brings in like different kinds of people to the city and gives the residents a chance to interact and open up to different ideas.
Okay. I mean, these are good elements, and at least we can. Here's the beginning of the kinds of data we could look at for, say, China. In China, we have all these, and we have similar kinds of things. We have different kinds of amenities, and then what this also adds is change, which we usually have not had with most of the Chinese papers. That is, which kinds of amenities, and so, I mean, an alternative could be a cross-national comparison of what and how are Chinese activities different. But what these are small prints, I'll say. Things that have really increased are spectator sports teams and clubs. That's Putnam, agents and managers for artists, athletes, and entertainers. Musical, how the Chinese frame this is industrial categories. I gave a talk to the Beijing Area Association. There were several 100,000 people talking about how do we study industrial categories in China, and these are the pieces of how we can do that. Look for something which is meaningful, and we have here arts and big Then we have the average. Then we go down to full-service restaurants. Even bookstores have been declining. Musical instruments are going down. Horse race tracks are going down a little bit. But the ones that are really down are amusement arcades, zoos and botanical gardens, pre-recorded tape CDs and record stores, bowling centers. These are all drinking places, alcoholic beverages are all going down. Okay, these are interesting. And this is a 50% change. It's not that big, but 50% drop is between 1999 and 2008. That's only 10 years. Okay, so this is the beginnings of here, but let me then shift to qualitative discussions in Chicago. One factor you mentioned is widely discussed is this used to be a much more, that is, a local city, explicitly embracing being responsive to the locality is what we still want. And that still is being used to feature another Chinese term, key policy term in China is called cultural tourism. 6 months ago, there was a big conference on cultural tourism. And there's massive amounts of money going into this in China. And so I'm speaking of China now, this week, the last 10 years. France has been doing this for hundreds of years. Tourism is a major driver of the French, Italian, Spanish, Greek economies. It's generally the largest industry and the drivers of these economies. So people in the Italian university can get a PhD in economics and tourism and so forth. Okay, so the one thing which connecting France and Chicago was Mayor Daley, too, grew up in the same home. The bike tour, we have a stop there at their home, the Daley home, where the family still is there. Mayor Daley, too, grew up with a local view of the world. He then married Maggie Daley, and she was interested in the arts. He then started to become, Daley he started going to meetings of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and people were saying, even though he can't speak proper English, he speaks Chicago, but he's brilliant, and he was doing brilliant things, including going to Paris. Okay, he went to Paris, and he said, hey, there are lots of things we could do, and so he would start to look for things, how they were specifically done, such as how the subways had more decorations inside, how the buses.
Yeah, the station here in Chicago downtown, inspired by Maurice Sudan, who designed a lot of the stations in Paris.
Oh yeah, the metro. Yeah.
Okay. What time period was that? Because there's some stations from the outside which are around just sometime in the early 20th century. Others are very recent. So I'm not sure which one you're referring to.
It's a metro station.
Okay.
It's a very famous. Like there's a Paris style sign that says metro. It's an underground station. I don't remember
that. Okay. Good. And is there another person who was important in working on decorations inside the trains and the subways in Chicago? On a reading list in for a couple of first readings. Theaster Gates, when he was hired, he's the most important artist in the world in terms of the rankings they had in the Venice Biennale about 5 years ago. Theaster Gates, African American, grew up as a poor guy. He worked for the city, and he redecorated with paintings and with style. Okay, etc. These are small examples of what Daley too, and we'll flash back to Harold Washington, which was a critical transitional figure in terms of the oral history of Chicago in the last 100 years. What did Harold Washington transform as mayor? What was his #1 issue and where did it come from? The same thing as in China, as I mentioned. Fighting corruption. It's still a basic thing in Italy and France as well. Fighting corruption. And these are often younger lawyers who are fighting against the traditional hierarchies. And in Italy, as I mentioned, they destroyed the entire party system. And in France, Macron destroyed the traditional French party system. The communists, etc. Christian Democrats, socialists, etc., were replaced in both of those countries by new parties, Berlusconi and Macron. I won't say Berlusconi was key, but there were many. The drivers were bigger context that I already talked about. Okay. In Chicago, same thing. And what happened in each of these, because there's an attack on corruption, what was corruption driven by? It's patronage politics. I give you a material reward, a job or a contract, especially, a contract to sell gravel to the city, a contract to give insurance to the city, and if I give you that, you mobilize through precinct captains or your company or the things, you will give me votes. Okay, that's the simple exchange of traditional patronage. Okay, if we have anti-corruption, which says no more jobs and contracts, then how can you be elected and maintained as a leader? Okay, so one option which Putnam has discussed is you have chaos, and we have a lot of chaos with these wars. That is the traditional hierarchy of the parties, which are still strong. More, say, in China, the party is still very strong. In Russia, not. That is, in roughly the same period, the Chinese political leaders saw what had happened in Russia, and they said, we don't want that in China. And so what the Chinese did was to privatize a fair amount of the private sector of business, but not change the political system. Whereas the Russians abolished both. They abolished the traditional Communist Party, and they had we can say chaos, political chaos, and the gangsters became hugely important for about 10 years, and then what do we have? The current president of Russia is very popular because he moved Russia away from chaos. And so the Chinese are very sensitive to these issues. They don't want chaos. And they're generally succeeding. But they also, as I pointed to a variety of things here, they're listening. So we talked about the lockdowns or the quarantining in China. Led dramatic change because citizens really said we don't want this. Okay, so the big point is if we lose the traditional resources for patronage politics, jobs, contracts, and material rewards, what do we need instead to give us legitimacy and charisma, ideally? Cultural tourism, the arts. And in the case of Chicago, another finding I gave you, the 4-mile downtown center of Chicago has grown relative to the suburbs faster than any other metro area in the entire United States in a number of the last 20 years. Very recently not. It's dropped down, but over the last 20 years, people have, this is people aged 25 to 34. Young people have massively come to Chicago, more than LA, Washington, Seattle, Berkeley, whatever. They came here. And the arts were a major driver. Now so we're looking for bits of evidence for different pieces of this, but the people are here. We have traditionally the Art Institute, the School of the Art Institute, the Columbia College are the two biggest ones, and there are many other small art schools here. So the people who train here, and then they stay here. And why and how they stay here? Daley was very, very sensitive to this. So the whole south end of the loop had traditional industrial warehouses and manufacturing buildings in the late 19th and early 20th century. When with electronics and new modes of producing, these things dropped. They went bankrupt, and the city of Chicago took over ownership of dozens and dozens of buildings in the whole south end of the loop. What did they do? They converted them into arts-related dormitories and facilities responsive to I won't try to. Nobody has a precise number because there's so many little things that come here from elsewhere in far as China. They come here. That is, you can register for an American college, which has a branch, a little office in Beijing, and a little office in Chicago, and they'll transfer 30 Chinese students who will come to downtown Chicago, and they can stay in dormitories nearby there. And so these then have relabeled the south end of Michigan Avenue has been called. That is, what's the name of the mile north of the Chicago River?
Can you repeat that?
The Magnificent Mile.
The Magnificent Mile. Okay, this was boarded up. We saw that being criticized by the alderman and the mayor right here, Laurie Lightfoot, say, it's disastrous for tourism. Tourism is a major driver of the economy of the government as well as the whole economy here. The south end is the image of the solution. What's the name for the south mile of Michigan Avenue below the river? It's now, take a bus, walk by there, there's signs there which say the cultural mile. The cultural mile includes the Art Institute, the Cultural Center, and further south, many other universities and schools, Columbia College and others, are either right on Michigan Avenue or a block over, and then there are many others which were built. We had a presentation by the guy who was there's a group called Downtown Chicago, and it's an association of the downtown. But the people who come are architects, planners, people who are foundation leaders, and people from the mayor's office. And so I went on a tour. I go to some of these meetings, and one of the guys who was there was the director of must be a 15-story building just for dormitories of students. It's owned by, I think, the three. Can we close that down just a little bit more, maybe half of that? And it's a fantastic dormitory, which is not just. Dormitory is the wrong label. It includes maybe 4 students together, and then they also have places where they can practice instruments loud in the building. There are ways that they can have music which they can perform. They have lectures and discussions. That is the Harvard and Yale in the 1930s, when they saw their people were coming from California or Wyoming. There's some smart people there that get into Harvard. The proportion of Jews went up to 30% in the 1930s, and they said we need to have people taught how to be proper Harvard gentlemen. So Harvard and Yale created these colleges, and they're doing the same thing by Daly in the south end of Chicago. Okay, the Marty Lipset has a history of Harvard, who went from Berkeley to Harvard, and he then became sensitized to how much culture really was a dynamic factor in the politics, and he articulated this in ways that I've framed some of this about in terms of the decline of class, but also in I'm using these specific institutional examples. Okay. The term Society of Fellows is taken from Harvard and is now at Michigan and Chicago. The Society of Fellows is for really teaching, and it's for teaching, or not just teaching assistants, but sort of young faculty teaching in ways that they're trying to connect elsewhere. Okay, so what I'm doing is pulling together a couple of themes around Okay. This was not in a reading list. He only had 15 pages for you to read about. What did you have in the 15 pages? New England, Middle Atlantic, and the South. Where did these come from? He has 4 volumes. These are volumes 1 and 3. He wrote 40 books. And half of them were about politics and political culture, and the other half were about the Jews, history of the Jews, and then the interrelation between the two of these is the critical creative part. One of his factors is, the basic idea of both Lipset and Elazar, is that the way, Lipset has a book, for instance, called the title of, I can't get it right away, but it's Latin America. I think it's Revolution in Latin America, or something like that. And Mocus became mayor of Bogota. Bogota has the most hierarchy and the most tradition of any of the Latin American countries. Lipset did surveys. They did surveys in Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, etc. Colombia had the most clear tradition of the hacienda, of the Spanish church and hierarchy and the colonial administration, of the conquistador. The families still are known by the city council members in Bogota today. People know from his name or her name whether or not they're a conquistador family or not. Mexico, not at all. After the Mexican Revolution in the 19th century, everybody's maybe not equal, but at least they don't have this residue going all the way back for 400 years, as you do have within Colombia. So the theory that Elazar draws from this is the covenant, the big concept of the covenant, and then the title here, the second book, The Great Frontier in the Matrix of Federal Democracy. So how can you get from the traditional hierarchy to this openness? And one thing which he takes from, it was invented by historians to talk about American history, that the frontier, with the experience that the U.S. just grew and people gradually moved further west as far as Northern California, and then Southern California, they came later. The frontier exacerbated what we've seen before and multiple times I've talked about, scenes as having factors here. This interaction effect. The frontier can people bring their income, their ethnicity, their religion. These factors are all leading to trust and to preferences in general. But Elazar's point is that the frontier weakens those traditional identity markers. And so the same thing as we're losing, so we're putting this together with the arts, that as you potentially weaken ethnicity in Chicago politics, then what does Daley have as an alternative? And Elazar's theory here is so Elazar then took this back for thousands of years and said, there are many frontiers, and the most important one in the model of the covenant was the Jews were enslaved and taken over by the Egyptians. So the Egyptians took the leading for many years, and then the waters opened, and the Jews returned to Israel, and they went up, and Moses, their leader, went to the top of the mountain, and he met with God, and God gave him the 10 Commandments. That is the covenant. That's the archetypical covenant that Elazar uses and says this kind of linkage between the people and God gives you a theologically based foundation for leading and for knowing what is morally right. Okay, that is the foundation of covenant within politics and then constitutionalism. Okay, that's Elazar's argument in a nutshell, is that the covenant, but the frontier can give you a weakening of the tradition. So if we flash forward, if we have the traditional, and so that is, the frontier makes people the same because they have to deal with, they don't have enough food. That is a norm, a classic norm. If you're on a horse or in a little carriage and you're going with 2 people, or maybe they usually travel in groups, maybe in a small medium group, whatever. When they would get to one place, or if there was just what if they ran out of food and they ran out of water? The norm in the American frontier is, if you're living in Wyoming, if you're living in Missouri, and people are moving further west, if you run out of food and you don't have any money, they are given support and money or food to get at that. And is there any expectation? Is there any expectation that you will be returned? That there's an exchange. Hey, you give me this, I give you that. You give me a job, I give you a vote. No. They break the norm that there's reciprocity. So the reciprocity norm that you must give back what you got is broken. And instead you have the covenant. You say it's right. You should help, and there are many sections of the Bible which will discuss this. Help those who, you can help those who need help most. Okay. What I'm giving you is one set of not only causal modeling, which is in Elazar, but the normative background, which is shared in some subgroups, which are politically important, but around which we have divisions I'm citing on the front page today and in the rest of the world. But see if I can bring up. Yeah. Oh, okay. I think I. What I'm looking for is the quotation from Max Weber's book, Ancient Judaism. So Weber's background was what? He was an economic historian. He had no training in the arts, no training in culture. He was explaining money and jobs and why and how the West took off in ways that did not happen in India or China or other parts of the world. But the essay that blasted this theory forth around 1890 was what? Which you've read, many of you. What book did you read by anybody in general culture, something like this in college? All right, so maybe it's not as widely read, or you didn't take the right word. All right. You ever hear of one book by I'm starting to give it away, by Max Weber?
The Protestant Athlete?
Did you read that in the course, or you just heard about it?
Yeah, I think I read that in so yeah.
Okay. What's the argument?
That it's morally ethical to like work really, really hard.
Yes?
That's all I can remember.
And why is it ethical? Why is it a good thing? Anybody else? Okay, this is the opposite of the Marxist interpretation. That Marx said, I have turned Hegel upside down. I put him on his head. And the term which was given to the approach by Engels was called historical materialism. Whereas he tried to simplify a little bit, and Hegel was an articulated leader of the German idealistic tradition. And so if you talk about religion, this is what Marx would say, this is the superstructure. Superstructure gets driven by the substructure. And how can this happen? And so Max Weber was surrounded by Marx in many of the universities, many of the public discussions, certainly on the left. But these were very smart Marxists who were trying to say, for instance, what's wrong with the theory? America doesn't have a left. Why is there no revolution? Why is there the most famous book is called Why Is There No Socialism in America? We never had socialism, seriously. Why not? And so the answer that they went into was in part the migration of people who self-selected, who went to America, were led, most of all in New England, were Calvinists. And this is the Max Weber argument. So he drew it from the European Calvinists who came from northern Germany, not the south of Germany. And within England, these were called the nonconformists, Baptists, Presbyterians from the north, but who were not part of the Church of England, not part of the Roman Catholic Church, and these had more of an entrepreneurial, individualistic style, which came in good part from the Bible, shared by both the Protestants and the Jews. So this is so I worked with Elazar for a long summer on this stuff, on sharing these, going back to the traditional New England moralistic patterns with the Jewish traditions, and how they join together. Okay, so I'm trying to. This thing working perfectly. just as I was coming in. Okay. Analytically, so if we get Southern California, why is this Southern? How we can start descriptively? How is it different? The moralism is in Napa Valley and north, San Francisco and north, basically. We get further south to LA and the like. There's more hierarchy, and then I'll just mention in a if I could- I'll say this for more detail, but I'll just mention to say if we want to have a name and an example and a theory, what's the source of hierarchy in China? Professor Chen, if you want to have a simple answer, what would you answer?
What?
Why do you have the Communist Party, the sense of hierarchy? Why is the West with individualism and egalitarian, or that is, let's say, entrepreneurship seen as undermining traditional Chinese values today?
You mean why the party is now the Communist Party?
That means that you can say the Communist Party, yes, but where does that come back historically, and where does that resonate in people's hearts and minds in China?
Now?
Yes.
I think now people are think the parties is very good. Yeah.
No, but that alone is very important. And the surveys show this. I mean, if you ask that how much do you trust leaders, the Chinese citizens, some 70–80% say lots. That is, there's a lot of support by Chinese citizens. You ask Americans, it used to be maybe 50%. Now it's dropped to 30% with Trump and so forth. We've got but the question is, where does this come from? And maybe we'll have a little more session later on, and we don't have time. But the quick answer is Genghis Khan.
Yeah, I have a survey talk about the Communist Party proposed the Chinese dream
Okay.
like this is for us to realize the aim. And I have a survey of 250 people in Zhejiang province. About 51% of the people recognize the Chinese dream and believe that the Chinese dream is a hope of hundreds of millions of people for a better life. So I think it's
What is the dream? That is it that is
to make people's life better, live better, and make their national stronger, like that.
But how can a family be more do something or obtain something which is fulfilling that dream?
Now we have some policies to increase the job opportunity, like for college students or someone else, and also to public things. Yeah.
But
To make
buildings, these are
yeah.
buildings and structures.
Yeah.
Okay.
To
But,
live
but,
better.
but almost all your examples, note, are material achievements, such as having people have a nice home,
Yeah,
a car,
nice home, yeah.
clothes,
Yeah.
physical material, and so the material, this is the early stage of Engelhardt in that sense. And so China in 1945 was a very, very poor country. They've been through a revolution and become amazingly successful, led by the Communist Party and its leaders, in achieving material success. Okay, Engelhardt continues that same theory. Engelhardt's theory is basically, as we then get to a more successful material situation, then people will then begin want to have beauty and culture and aesthetics, and that's what's now happening with a vengeance in China. And this is why they're interested in scenes, because we're looking for planning and ways of joining these together, and using and building on the material, not ignoring, but joining them with also value. So one shared, widely shared value, which joins these in a complicated way, is egalitarianism. That is, so and this is what links back to Elazar and the egalitarianism, is that everybody should share. Okay, so they said globalization is not just capitalism or Wall Street. It is and some will see it with Engelhardt as democratic egalitarianism. But what I'm pointing to here quickly is that we have multiple dimensions, and they can fight against each other. So the achievement of Wall Street and the achievement of some of these, at least, with some, as is in some so analytically, hierarchy and egalitarianism are critical, but are not totally associated with any single type of regime, including colonialism. They want to add hierarchy to the stress of Max Weber and Elazar on the Western individualistic market egalitarianism. The moralistic of the ancient Jewish prophets was plural, not just Jesus, and they recurred with threats of military domination and destruction. Okay, this has been thought through and articulated in recent years, and in the last 20 years, the R has been dropped. Robert Bella has communal dancing, cultural capacity, storytelling, theorizing, whose emergence made this religious development possible. So what he did was to build on the latest. Okay, I'm going quickly because, that is, I elaborate this in two other courses, in the winter and in the spring. We go into this in more detail, but this is a background of which is critical for mayor's policies, which are more narrowly descriptive, and we're focusing on more in general in this course. But I'm showing you that Bella's insight was to, and working with others, there's a lot of new historical material which shows the four great civilizations of the axial age in ancient Israel, Greece, China, and India. Their religions all show existing religions, both prophetic and mystical, were rooted in the evolutionary story. So the book is called Religion and Human Evolution, calls for critical history of religion rather than a full range of cases. So Elazar, no, I won't. Okay, I'll just leave it that way for now. to say that what he elaborates in a couple of books, and there are others who are now exploring these axial age kinds of ideas, hypotheses, about how these offer a way of where there were elements that were shared, but also conflict between China and India and the West. And so this was the central question of Max Weber. So he did the Protestant ethic book, but then he said, why did this not happen in China, not in India? What was there? And not in Southern Europe, not in Southern Italy. And so the answer was the first Ancient Judaism, that's the title of Max Weber's book. The Religion of China, the Religion of India, and then the student of Parsons who followed this up was Robert Bella. His PhD was on Tokugawa religion in Japan. And so to try to add these pieces together, then he spent his lifetime studying values and changes in the U.S. And he's really pulled this together in a really intriguing sort of way. That is, this gives you an answer of egalitarianism in China, which goes back before Mao. This goes back earlier, but it was then implemented with Mao against Chiang Kai-shek. So Chiang Kai-shek lost the war. They went to Taiwan. This is why this is hot stuff now. See, so many of the traditional elite persons, families, businesses left China and they went to Taiwan. And they did not say we are Taiwanese. They said no, we are Chinese. I've had several students from Taiwan who gone into this in some degree of cultural detail. The traditional hierarchy was really strengthened and institutionalized more forcefully in Taiwan with Chiang Kai-shek, whereas the ideal of Mao was stronger egalitarianism. So that part of the cultural policy was that every Chinese citizen should have equal access to the Chinese cultural background. Every county, the 3,000 counties in all of China roughly, all of them have a cultural center, a library, and a theater. And these are then, that if they don't have them, they're then constructed and then they are supported and funded by the Ministry of Culture. These are one physical specific manifestation which we're now getting in a mini version on South Michigan Avenue called the Cultural Line. So we have a little version here. The Chinese have done this all over China in a massive way. And then the fight. So I'm mentioning Chiang Kai-shek, but the background for Chiang Kai-shek is what we have there. I'll just mention in passing is Genghis Khan. So Genghis Khan basically was Manchurian horsemen, and they conquered and burned and destroyed Beijing. The whole population either died or they moved out. The same thing they did was the largest city in Russia at the time was Kiev, which is being fought over right now. The Kiev, the capital of the Ukraine, that was the most important city historically in Russia, and it was totally flattened, burned, and the residents were killed by Genghis Khan. Okay, so Genghis Khan then conquered China and Russia, and he controlled in his next generations with his family more land in any conquered empire than ever in the history of the world. It went down to include Iraq and Iran, and so the Iraqi and Iranian the populations of Iraq and Iran were destroyed. The key cities of Iraq and Iran, all the residents were either killed or driven out. But mostly were just killed. So massive death. But in a sense, what we have in Chicago was a great fire. In San Francisco, the city burned as well. That's like a migration. That is, you're starting over again, and people, that reinforces egalitarianism. If people have something this is the Elazar theory, heightening egalitarianism from a destructive kind of background. So within Russia, this has been more studied than in China. I've been looking for people to do this in China. Okay, so here's just social psychology of the prophets. Just show you one. Max Weber. After the lull of the conquest policies of the great state, in the 9th century, the great kings of Mesopotamia, like those of later Egypt, once again resumed their expansionist policy. Assyria became etc. Blood fairly drips from the cuneiform inscriptions of the etc. As impending gloom beclouded the political horizon, classical prophecy acquired its characteristic form. The pre-exilic prophets from Amos to Jeremiah and Ezekiel viewed through the eyes of the political demagogues and on occasion pamphleteers. Isaiah directed a pamphlet against etc. In the same category, the written curse which Jeremiah, so I'm just give you some of it. This is page 267. So right at the beginning, you gotta dig to see, and that in terms of Weber's 3 types of leadership, legitimacy, and in our Scenescapes book, what's legitimacy? The 3 that come from Max Weber are bureaucracy, tradition, and charisma. The charisma is who's the classical example which is used by Max Weber? Jesus Christ. This is where the message of Christ came from, in what Max Weber is stressing here. Jehovah commanded Jeremiah, "Go thou into the streets of Israel and speak in public." Not just in a church, but use the streets to mobilize and attack the legitimacy of the king. Okay. As a rule, however, the prophet personally confronted also the king and his family in the streets, spoken publicly. Okay. However, the predominant concern of the prophet was the destiny of the state and the people. This concern also assumed a form of emotional invective against the overlords. The demagogues, the word of fear, appeared for the first time in the records of history. Okay. So, I don't want to do any more for now, but I'm just saying these are some of the classical foundations and which people are citing, mostly not realizing how much Genghis Khan is still fighting inside China with the Mao egalitarianism, and they're both present, and they're both in California, and they're both in Chicago. And so looking at where and how these fit together and are fighting with each other, and the book well, so in underlying some of these other things, or further down on the reading list, include Aaron Vildovsky, A Cultural Theory of Leadership, is right out of this, including including I'm gonna stop it. I'm talking too much, and I'm gonna let you bring in some questions or comments on what I've said. And I'm summarizing obviously lots of things, and mostly I have not written. I've distilled, but these are not my original ideas, as you can see. Weber, Elazar, etc. Questions, comments? Yes.
Well, I found the quote about globalization being not just about capitalism very true and interesting in our like interconnected society today, because a lot of the conflicts or even exchanges between nations don't only apply to nations of the same democratic or political regime. And I think especially in today's more polarized society, the variation between different regimes and them still being interconnected through globalization is particularly striking.
Yes. However, I would add that is globalization in Saskia Sassen's book. Globalization is Wall Street. In addition to Hollywood and the Bible and egalitarianism, that's not from Wall Street. So where and how these different aspects of globalization are working, that is, in the smart university students from China and from Japan in the 1920s were sent to Europe. They then came back with enough egalitarianism and ideological challenges of the traditional hierarchy that they stopped sending the university students from China to either go to Japan or go to Moscow or somewhere else. So globalization thus has multiple meanings. The course this winter is called Global Local Politics. So I've taught courses with Saskia Sassen, but so yes, that's part of it, but it's a messy field, and so I'm openly frank about this, and what we try to do in the course is build a set of propositions one by one, and then how can we test it, and how can we build a framework for analyzing this coherently. But the answer is we can take an individual mayor, an individual city, but it's not everything in San Diego or everything about Southern California. It's only certain things which fit this more general kind of interpretation, and that's why that's why we're trying to get the pieces of those. But go ahead. If you want to follow up on that, or anybody else, or anything else I'm going to say, that is, well, or if you want to follow, say on globalization and French politics, that's a good theme in a sense. That is.
Well, I mean, France is with the European Union. I think even globalization, I don't know, like exchanges between the Union and with the Schengen area. The borders sort of disappear, even though the culture remains in each country, because like Spain, Italy, France, Switzerland, they have similar aspects, but it's the same thing you were talking about, globalization being, it applies in some cases, but not in all. And in this case, you can see it because the Swiss are different than the French, and yet you can travel from one country to another with just an ID.
I was in France 15 or so years ago when there was a president, there were big elections, and I listened to the debates, and there was an explicit sort of statement of we in France, we must be able to confront and engage and succeed in a market competition with the rest of the world. We cannot just be closed, and so some of the other political parties wanted to be more closed, and so that in that way, market, the exchanges, in that sense. And so Macron has tried to join those two. He's trying to keep the egalitarianism of citizens and the socialist mayors of Paris having the beaches along the Seine, which anyone can go to. You can have free access to the beaches. You have that is the socialist mayors of Paris have done that at the same time that you have the hierarchy of the market, which is generating these massively successful tourism, restaurants, hotels, etc. And this was so Benjamin's book. I mean, Benjamin's 19th and 20th century success, following up on the Versailles through Napoleon up to present. France has done this as a nation, culturally and militarily and economically, and going back as I went back to the castles. I mean, this was the French answer to the Italian Renaissance. They lost in the paintings. They bought Da Vinci, and they brought the Mona Lisa there. But what they added that was truly original was the castles, the streets, and then making the city of Paris in that sense is a model for Washington, D.C. So Washington, D.C. is the one city that has circles and was designed by French architects and planners, whereas New York and the rest of American cities have grids, squares. Okay, we are at the end of our time, but we've got lots of big issues deliberately linking with these, but joining them through mayors. Let's keep it up.